Okay, so this is the last kind of big narrated lecture prior to the final exam for work in industry. So this is week 11 for work in industry, the lecture PowerPoint narration. This is on factory workers, factory work in general, and workers' compensation. Some important stuff around workers' comp that you need to know for this class, and I'm sure may come back on the board exam as well, because a lot of OTs are constantly working with workers' comp if you're in rehab. So, looking at workers' compensation, the history of it became mandatory back in the late 40s. Prior to that, employees really had no significant legal protection. If you were hurt on the job, you were kind of out of luck. Um, it's complicated in the sense that it's unique for each state. It's a combination of federal and state laws. Some workers are exempt from workers' comp, like domestic workers, or you have a really small business, less than 5 employees, you don't have to pay for workers' compensation. When I say pay, the employer has to pay for this insurance. I think it's a combination of the employer paying and the government paying part of the insurance premiums and all that as well. Um, General themes provides medical benefits regardless of fault, as long as it is work related. Doesn't matter whether it was the worker's fault or their employer's fault, as long as it happened on the job and it's closely related to the job, it will pay. Provides benefits without necessity of litigation. And the whole idea of it was to kind of reduce a lot of the suing that went on between an employee and employer over uh, job loss and on the job injuries, huge claims, and all that sort of stuff. It was supposed to be a good thing for both parties to kind of limit the litigation and provide benefits, needed benefits. There are a few exceptions to that, but mostly it prohibits suing of employers and encourages injury prevention. The workers' compensation costs for the employer, for the job, those costs go down the more safe the less injuries they have on the job. That's why you see such a big emphasis in a lot of big employers, especially factories and stuff, around worker safety. Not that they don't care about their employees, but it saves them tons of money in a lot of different ways. One of the ways it saves them a lot of money is their worker compensation costs go down the more safe it is on the job. Rehabilitation is part of workers' comp. This is kind of where we come in as OTs. Also promotes study, get all this data, centralized data based kind of sources of work-related injuries. Um, Eligibility for benefits. Causal relationship must exist between work and the injury or illness for employee to be eligible. Again, it's not so much fault, but it has to be related to the job. An employee's job must be a major contributing factor in the cause of injury or in some cases death. There are death benefits as well. There is variation between states in terms of what type of injury is compensable, what type of injury they're going to pay for. So again, it can be complicated. It is very different from state to state. Maine is very different from other states. So it gets to be very political as things kind of swing back and forth in terms of how much workers' comp pays for, whether the one party is in or the other party is in politically. Some examples of how it varies. Work-related stress. Some states cover that. Some states don't. They say it's not related to work or you can't prove it. Horseplay, if you're fooling around at work and you hurt yourself, is that job related or not? Some states say it is, some states say it isn't. And here's a key one: coverage of work injuries related to prior medical history if employer lied about prior medical history when hired. Let's say you've had some tendonitis, carpal tunnel in one job, and you don't tell the next job because you're worried that they may not hire you, and it's legitimate fear. They may not hire you if you know that you have some kind of pre-existing injury, but then you get the carpal tunnel again, and they say, "Oh, you've already had this. It wasn't related to this job. It was related to the other job, so we're not going to pay for it." So it gets very dicey legally, in terms of what's going on and what employer can do and employee can do in terms of rights, and again, variation from state to state. Income replacement benefits. It does pay income replacement benefits while you're out of work. Depends. There's different kinds of programs. There's a temporary total and partial disability. These are most common. These are what you're going to be dealing with mostly as OTs. they're partial disability or total disability, and your job is through these work conditioning programs, rehab, to get them back on the job, get them off the disability, and that's where you get these on-site work conditioning programs. So they're back working, not getting the workers' comp. They're getting paid, but they're back in the job, and it's really good to get them back as soon as possible. The higher, better outcomes, the quicker they get back to job in any capacity at all. And then there's permanent, partial, and total disability. This is a whole legal thing to qualify for this through a judge and all that. But you can get permanent disability depending on the severity of the injury on the job. One benefit is something called vocational rehabilitation. This is rehabbing them to get back to the job, rehabbing them to get a new job that may be slightly different or very different from what they were doing. So again, they can get back into the workforce. This includes job counselors and therapists. Occupational therapists can be involved with this. Can include work hardening. Some programs are mandatory for the claimant. Others are voluntary. 4 types of benefits: the death benefits, medical expenses. This is the big one. Income replacement, and then the vocational and rehab training. This is kind of where we come in. Workers' comp benefits are constantly changing because of the political back and forth play between the Democrats and the Republican. Cost of benefits are paid by the employer. Tax dollars, private insurance is kind of a mix of all of them. Cost is expensive to businesses. That's what makes it such a political football. States are trying to get new businesses to come into their state and boost the economy with new jobs, and the employer complains about the cost of workers' comp, and it's a real thing. It's a real big expense. It can be a really hindering expense around work-related injuries, that sort of stuff. Okay, litigation. There's a lot of litigation at times with workers' comp about which of the benefits they're going to pay, how much of the benefits they're going to pay, is it permanent or partial, temporary disability, and that's where we come in a lot of cases. Our documentation can be like a legal document saying this person is ready to go back to work, or they're not ready to go back to work, or they're not showing up for their work conditioning program. Of contesting with lawyers, and like the documentation can be part of the case. Case managers, you're dealing with these case managers. If you have somebody on workers' comp, depending on the severity of it, how much they're getting, for payments. You may be in weekly contact with a case manager, or maybe just documentation papers back and forth kind of thing. But they want those objective measures. This is where that FCE comes into play, that functional capacity evaluation. It's a very legitimate, legalized, standardized scientific thing, as we talked about. And so you can use those numbers to say, okay, they've demonstrated in this FCE that they are capable of going back to work and they're physically able to go back to work, so you can stop paying the benefits. Missed appointments, I think we talked about that in some of the classes. We were breaking down those lecture questions. But it's very important that the person shows up for the rehab of their workers' comp. It's almost like their job. And sometimes there's these 3 strikes and you're out rule, and if you miss 3 appointments, you're going to be discharged from therapy, and you're going to lose your benefits potentially as well. Who is the OT client with this? This can be kind of a ethical dilemma in a lot of cases. I've kind of been involved with this. It's very common to get involved with this because you get conflicting interest. The major players are the work within the system or the client. You think you want to be client focused along with the insurance and the employer. But in a lot of cases, you're not really working for the client, you're working for the workers' comp that's paying for your services. So you have a kind of an obligation to all these parties. This is where you get this conflict of interest at times. One issue that continuously can be conflict is this idea of pain and acceptable levels of pain and discomfort. An occupational physician may say level of pain it's definitely there, but it's not at the level that we need to hold you back from going back to work. It's going to hurt, but it's not going to hurt you. It's an okay kind of pain. It's just a dull ache, whatever, from the carpal tunnel that we can't really get rid of. And what happens in a lot of cases is the workers' comp person goes to the regular doctor, and they contradict the occupational doctor, occupational physician, and you're kind of stuck in between. You know, how much pain is this? Can I go back to work with this pain? Is it just going to make everything worse? That sort of stuff. So that's where the conflict kind of comes in. It almost comes down to your code of ethics at times. To me, definitely workers' comp is paying for my services, but my duty, my ethical duty, was always to the client. You know, to be objective, honest as you possibly can about what you're seeing, not trying to slant it one way or the other. Another ethical dilemma around this workers' comp stuff is you can't bill. We talked about this in one of the classes the other day, but you can't ethically bill regular health insurance for work-related injuries. If you something that you think is obviously and clearly work-related, it's really unethical to bill their private insurance because private insurance is not obligated to pay for that. The employer, the workers' comp whole system is obligated to pay. And this can be, as you suspect, can be a very gray area in a lot of cases. Okay, so that's the first